All right, thanks, Bill. There'll be payback, trust me. All right, so my presentation today is going to be different from the first two. It's really a case study. It's going to be a story of Africa. I think it's a story that happens many places, many parts of Africa. It's going to be a somewhat personal story. I'm going to be telling you about my people. I'm African. I'm sub-Saharan African. You remember that Bill put the picture up there, the red spots, the places that didn't develop? You're looking at it. I grew up in a town called Cacao. I went to the school system there. Everything you've heard about poverty, it exists there. There was no electricity. When I was going through school, most of our schools were boarding schools. This was a choice by the Ghana government. When there was no water, we would put buckets of water on our head, and we would walk for miles to bring it back, to brush the teeth, to have a shower. I was in the village just a few weeks ago. No, not just a few weeks ago. 3 days ago, okay? I was in the village, and unfortunately, many of those things are still there. Early in the morning, and over there, they wake up at 4:30 in the morning. You'll be hearing the clatter of, this time it's trucks coming by selling cartons, they call them jerry cans over there, of water. Water is a big deal there. There's a big market in water, okay? So everything you hear talk about poverty, that's it, okay? I'm going to give you a slightly different story, hopefully today. A story of optimism, a story of people who are very, very, very hardworking. These are people who, they get up in the morning, as I said, at 4:30, and they walk 5 miles, 6 miles to the farm. They produce their goods. They put it on their heads. They walk 5, 6 miles back. I'm going to be telling you of very proud people who are actually exceptionally good entrepreneurs. I'll be making the argument that contrary to what you hear at the World Bank, contrary to what you hear at the IMF, contrary to what you hear through some economists, at the end of the day, all the kinds of things you think about in the United States, entrepreneurship being important, technology being important, all those same things happen in Africa. I remember I was with Bill. It was a very good moment. I think maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, Bill. We were in Spain. DRI got a big award from BBVA, the bank there. And I remember as we were giving the talk, I just remember two things about it. Number one is that it was the World Cup. My team, Ghana, was playing at that time, so I was nervous beyond belief. And the other thing I remember saying is, sometimes when you're from Africa and you listen to the economics being spoken about Africa, you get the feeling that because we happen to be poor, our economics should also be poor. Some of the things I sometimes hear people saying about Africa and Africans, it just defies all economic theory, okay? It's just, excuse my French, nonsense, okay? So what I'm going to try and give you today is a case study of cocoa as it passed through Ghana. A key date to remember is 1879. Just keep that date, okay? That's going to be the key period. There's going to be a man called Tetteh Quarshie. Keep that name in your mind, okay? Other than that, I'm going to give you a case study. And the case study is essentially going to prove to you that if you give people anywhere, markets, they will figure the rest out. If there's an opportunity there, they will figure out how to exploit that opportunity. When growth doesn't occur, it's either because the opportunities are not there, the technologies are not there, or governments, nations are restricting people from the free flow of technology, free flow of goods and services across markets, okay? So that's going to be my big pitch. At the end of the day, sub-Saharan Africa is no different from the United States. The people in sub-Saharan Africa are no different from any of you sitting in this room. Their opportunities may be different. Their births might be born in a different circumstance, but they respond to incentives just as well as everybody else. So that's going to be the story. All right, I should remark this is joint work with Professor Emmanuel Achampo, the History Department at Harvard. We, of course, thank the Templeton Foundation, which is making all of this work possible. A lot of my research is also being funded by NYU Abu Dhabi, CV Star Center, and a fairly significant anonymous grant, which has enabled us to develop what we call town halls in Ghana. So we've put up a building. Well, we have, through NYU, an office in Accra. We're putting up buildings in very, very remote areas. Our theory is that if we're going to study economics, let's go to where the people are, and let's understand what they're doing. And so our PhD students, some of them are in the audience, they visited these places. I also thank Laura, where are you, for all the hard work. Thank you, Laura, okay. All the hard work, yeah, big. My CTED team, I see Luba here, I see Marion here, Lauren and all of our RAs, they made all of this possible. We have a team in Ghana as well. All of this is research in progress, so I really welcome all of your comments. And let me take my phone out here so I make sure I'm on time. 12 o'clock. How much time do I have? Half an hour from now. Okay. Thank you. All right, so again, as I said, a lot of this story is going to be somewhat personal, okay? It's going to be a story where I'm going to try and convince you that the standard laws of economics is obeyed by even the poorest members of society. I'm going to give the example, as I said, indigenous entrepreneurs in Ghana. I'm going to look at the spread of cocoa, 1879 to today. I'm going to emphasize the early period, okay? Future research will come back and talk about some of the later periods. So that's what's going to happen. All right, so a bit of background. Ghana is a country in Africa, as you all know. You may have seen Bill's wonderful diagram there. There was that patch in red. Somewhere there is where I'm from, but you may not have noticed it, but there was a little patch of orange among all of that red, okay? And that's Ghana, so I'll take a tiny bit of credit there, okay? There's something good going on there. All right. I'm going to talk about cocoa, all right? So the technical name for cocoa is Theobroma cacao, food of the gods. Cocoa was not developed in Africa. It wasn't developed in Ghana. It was developed in South America, Mexico. The groups before the Olmecs are the ones who discovered that there were rats eating on this pod, and anytime they ate on it, they were very, very happy with a big smile on their rat faces. And so they went out to figure out what was going on, and so we're talking 1400 BC. They, at the end of the day, discovered what we now call cocoa, which, of course, as you all know, is the main ingredient of chocolate. So all you chocoholics, you got to thank the Olmecs. The Mayans used it. The Aztecs used it. So as some of you may know, Montezuma, the leader of the Aztecs, was the one who encountered the Spanish the first time. Cortez. He loved chocolate, coffee, cocoa. Anytime he had a big feast or a big party, there would be cocoa flowing all over the place. And perhaps part of the reason why cocoa is so adored today may be the fact that I think right before he went to his harem, he would imbibe lots and lots of cocoa. At least that's what the literature says. The Europeans discovered cocoa from the Aztecs, sent it to Europe. First in Spain, it was being used by the royal families there. Then it spread to the rest of Europe. The initial cultivation of cocoa was actually in Brazil. Okay, so now we're talking 1600. Europeans then decided to try to grow cocoa in Africa. Some of the first places it was grown was Sao Tome and Principe. They were getting workers from Angola. They tried it there. Mozambique, Equatorial Guinea. Notice that in this story, I have not mentioned the word Ghana. So cocoa was started in all these other places by Europeans. Here's my map of Ghana. 1879, there was a man called Tetteh Quarshie. He was a carpenter. He made a trip to Equatorial Guinea. He discovered there that people were producing something called cocoa. He took some of those seeds back to Ghana. We're talking 1879, and perhaps I should remind all of you that in 1879, the British were in charge of Ghana. Ghana was, at that time, called the Gold Coast. It was a colony, but the British had control only over the southern tip of the country. A tiny bit further north, my people, the Ashanti. The Ashanti were engaged in wars against the British. 1874, there was a big war. And as of the time that Tetteh Quarshie brought the seeds in, the Ashanti was still fighting against the British. Those wars ended in 1901, which is a time you should keep in mind. And what I like to tell people all the time, especially when we have gender disputes, the 1901 war was a war that was led by a woman. Her name was Yaw Santiwa, one of the big heroes of my country, Ghana. It turns out that after the Ashanti were beaten in 1874 by the British, all the men were too chicken to fight again. So she got up one day and said, hey, are you guys going to fight? Are you just going to sit down and be wimps? And so she aroused the entire nation, the Ashanti nation, into war again. Unfortunately for the Ashantis, they lost. The British had developed better machine guns at that time. And so the British came in 1901 and burned down the capital of the Ashanti, Kumasi. That's why to this day, if you go to Kumasi, you will find nothing, very few things of historical importance because the entire city was burnt down. Anyway, that's the context within which a remarkable story happened. 1879, as I said, this carpenter went into Equatorial Guinea. At that time, most of the cocoa plantations were owned by the Europeans. They were plantation style. There were lots of stories of slavery in those plantations. There are a number of books that have spoken about slavery. And again, we're talking 1901 here, okay? So there's slavery by Europeans into the plantations. 1879, he comes into Ghana with some of these seeds. With Emmanuel Champo, we went into the areas where Tetteh Quarshie first brought his seeds, and we asked the older folks there, what do you know about this story? And you'd be surprised that many of the stories were around the fact that he smuggled in the cocoa pods. Some people even went to say that he swallowed them, came on the boat in, and that's how he eventually got the seeds into the country, okay? I doubt whether that story is true, but it points to something. It points to the fact that the British, at that time, had picked a crop for Ghana to produce. And you know what the pick was? Coffee. For some reason, the British government wanted to pick a winner, and the winner that they picked at that time was coffee. And so there was a fear by Tetteh Quarshie that if he brought the cocoa in, the British will arrest him, seize the cocoa, etc. Okay? So that's the context within which all of this happened. Again, 1879 is when he brought it in. After the success, at least what I'll tell you shortly is success of this, when you read the literature, okay, if you read the literature, you will find that there are other claimants to bringing in the first cocoa, all right? However, as we've gone through the literature, as we've gone through the original material, it looks as if Tetteh Quarshie is indeed the first person to bring it in. Some other key players that we should keep in mind, they'll be part of this story. Basel missionaries, the missionaries, they're from Germany. The Dutch in Elmina about 50 years earlier. And of course, the British government, all at some time, made a claim that they're the ones who brought the cocoa in, okay? And so if you read the literature, it's actually very kind of funny. You see statements about the native. Again, this is, we're talking 1880s there. This is the beginning of the Victorian era, the beginnings of racial discrimination, if you will, okay? If you read the literature, sometime before that, there weren't that many distinctions according to skin color. But it's around 1880 that a lot of racism started, at least skin color-wise, in that area. All right, so I'm going to be telling you the story. Let's keep going. First of all, please note the Olmecs, the Maya, the Aztecs all loved cocoa. The Europeans added sugar to it. They loved cocoa. For some reason, the natives did not like cocoa, at least not until more recent times. They had very, very little use for the cocoa other than as a business and eventually as export. We've read in places when cocoa was being introduced into Ghana, some of the locals actually thought that the cocoa was ground by the Europeans and put in gasoline for the cars that many were seeing for the first time. So they actually thought of it as a petrol additive. I think today in some of the research institutes, they're actually thinking of cocoa, at least the husk of it, being used as a biofuel. So they weren't quite wrong at that time. Also, let me remark that this is different from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a place where they produce coffee, and at some future stage, we'll have a conversation on that. But in Ethiopia, coffee is 1,000 years old. It's part of the culture, okay? Ghana is not like that. This is something which was produced only for commercial purposes. And as I'll show you shortly, technology was very, very important here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to explain to you the technology of making cocoa. I'll contrast it with the European versions of making cocoa. And so perhaps this is a slight, maybe addendum to the Ross's paper, okay? So we're actually going to see some failures by the Europeans who came in here, at least when, in terms of cocoa. All right, so when you read World Bank documents, when you talk to NGOs who are going into Africa, what are the kinds of things they say? They say you need to pump lots of money into Africa because the poor peasants have no money. They have no capital. They say you have to explain everything to them. You need massive extension services. You need aid, all kinds, okay? You need to have millions of dollars, MEDA, MCC, and all of that going into the villages to explain to the farmers what to do, how to do it, okay? What happened in the story of cocoa? So Tetteh Quarshie brought those seeds into Ghana. He brought them into the southern part of the country because slightly north, the British and the Ashanti were fighting, okay? There was war going on. So it's only a small fraction of the nation that was actually safe in 1879. What did the locals do when they were producing their cocoa? At that time, we had lots of big forests. I remember being told in the 60s in my own home area, when it opened up for timber production, there's this sign that they used to make, okay? And so people came in with the standard timber trucks, and the trees that were there were so big, they didn't fit on the standard timber trucks. And so in the local line, you said, this thing is too big for your little tiny wimpy trucks that were going on, okay? So in that place, they had huge forests, okay, massive forests. The implements the locals were using were just two implements, essentially a cutlass, okay? You all know what a cutlass is, right? You've all seen one, perhaps held one. It's like this with a spike over there. And a version of a cutlass with a point, a curve at the end of it. You'll see what it's used for. They would get the trees, burn the bottom so the tree will fall. They'll let the trees decay. It becomes natural fertilizer. They put the seeds inside it. The cocoa germinates. It takes 5 years after you've put the seed in for a cocoa tree to sprout. 5 years, okay? So point number one, those of you who are saying that credit is the thing that's preventing economic development, I don't think that that's the case. These people were able to figure out how to produce crops which take 5 years to gestation, right? So labor and everything, you've got to pay whatever you need to pay for a full 5 years before you get anything out of it. So point number one, the whole insistence on finance, is it misplaced? Anyway, so that's the first point. I will show you now. These are pictures from around 1885, 1900, 1910. So this is a cocoa farm. We got these pictures from the Basel Mission. And if you see in there, this is a family producing cocoa in the Mampong area, a little bit south where there was no war going on. These are cocoa trees. So again, you put the seeds in the ground, you wait five to 7 years, you get something like this. The cocoa trees are unusual in the sense that it's something called cauliflory. The pods grow from the trunk of the tree itself. And so you see them on the sides here, right? One of the technological innovations of the locals was to cross, it's called intercropping. So what they would do is that they'll get the seeds, they'll put them in the ground, and the way they supported themselves was to grow around it local consumables. Cocoyam, the leaf of cocoyam produces something like a spinach, yams, and other crops. Okay, so they would intercrop these things with the cocoa. It became a way of sustaining families while the cocoa farms were being grown, and therefore it obviated the need for capital. Okay, so this was an innovation. All right. Maybe I should say this here. The European farms, in contrast, did not have intercropping. There were only plantations, and all of them required loans. Okay? And so the locals were able to get around this problem by intercropping. So that's one innovation they had different from the Europeans. This is the breaking of the pods. And so after you pick the pods, you pile them up, you break it, and inside it is actually white, okay? The outside of it is the thing that the rats love, okay? That's what they eat into, and that is what could one day be a biofuel. You put the white inside baskets. This is the white. They then covered the white inside of the cocoa pods, inside leaves. These are banana leaves, which helped the fermentation process. This was not occurring in many of the European farms, and this gave a particular flavor to Ghanaian cocoa. And again, if I fast forward, recall I said cocoa was first produced in Brazil. It's produced in all other parts of Africa. It was smuggled into Ghana. But within about 10, 15 years, Ghana was producing almost 1/3 of the entire world's production of cocoa, right? How did that happen? And so the argument I'm trying to make is that these were individual indigenous entrepreneurs, brought in new technology, new ideas. This was one of the new ideas, okay? It put a certain kind of flavor into the coffee, into the cocoa that made Ghanaian cocoa premium. So this is the fermentation process. After it's fermented, you put it on racks. You dry them. These racks are at hand height. You put those things in there, you dry it, and you need to be able to squish it around with your hands, okay? Another innovation. The European versions all tried mechanized things, okay? Transport. So these things were put in bags. The bags were carried, often by women. Or the following would happen. They would purchase barrels. They put the cocoa in it. And these barrels had a special particular feature. Around the barrel, on the rim, are two lines, usually made of steel, sometimes made of wood. And in the very early days, before there were roads, they would roll these things from the cocoa producing areas all the way to the coast where these things are being shipped out, okay? And so again, this is indigenous local enterprise, if you will. Over here, you see a situation where before a bridge was built, they just used these logs to roll it across. Later on, the entrepreneurs themselves, before the British got there, would form associations to jointly put up and create bridges. They have small tolls to get their money back, but they were able to send the cocoa from the hinterland all the way into the coast. Point number two, sometimes as we speak, we think that everything, without infrastructure, you can't do anything, right? Without roads, nothing will happen. Here are people who were able to ship cocoa out, and again, don't forget, they produce 1/3 of the world's output of cocoa, sometimes by rolling it down. All right? These guys liked walking. Just to give you another story, in 1901, when the British beat the Ashantis, my people, they exiled the king of Ashanti to Freetown, Sierra Leone, which is 2 countries over, right? You have to pass all of Ivory Coast and then get there, several hundred miles. So the Ashantis, what they did was they had relay stations. When the king was exiled there, they had relay stations, and literally people would walk up and down. So even though the guy was exiled there, he was still in charge of the Ashanti Empire. The British finally got wind of that a few years later and then shipped him off to the Seychelles, other side of Africa, where you have to swim. And Ashantis like me don't like swimming. So that was the end of communication with the king of Ashanti. So anyway, there was a lot of rolling and walking along in creating the cocoa industry. It's where the cocoa came. Cars were slowly introduced there. When you read the literature, the Europeans were taking credit in building roads all across the country, and they claimed that it was those roads that led to the big cocoa revolution. We found out that most of those roads went exactly along the paths created by the locals. The Ashantis themselves Ashanti was a big war nation. They kept on fighting, especially on the coast, and they had a lot of commerce, okay? The rise of the Ashanti Empire was, again, I think Bill mentioned it, within that small area, there was a lot of commerce going on. The Ashanti Empire, I'm Ashanti, as I said before, expanded on the one side to the next country over Côte d'Ivoire. Part of my family lives in Côte d'Ivoire, and extended all the way to current-day Togo, okay? So the Ashanti Empire had this extensive system of roads and trade and commerce, which is what brought them up in the first place, prior to cocoa. Again, just to make the point that Bill made, can you believe that when the colonialists were coming to colonize the place, my people, they drew a line, the center part, to become Ghana, and endowed them with the language English. Then the other side, some more Ashantis there, they endowed them with the language French. And as if that wasn't bad enough, on the other side, was a country then called the Transvolta. They endowed them with what? German, okay? So one tribe, all of a sudden, there were these boundaries, French, English, German, okay? And then after a while, trade stopped between the two of them. So apropos of what Bill was saying, I think that those are some of the reasons for the underdevelopment of Ghana, of Africa. But anyway, I digress. Here are some depots. The fishermen would take the cocoa to the ships, and you can barely see that in the horizon. They'll send it off. They'll get their money, okay? So that, in a nutshell, is the story of cocoa. I bring it up anytime I read World Bank documents, anytime I hear people say the constraint to development is, take your pick. People, no technology, no aid, no capital. I always try and remember this story. From next to nothing to 1/3 of the world's production of cocoa. To this day, cocoa is still one of the leading exports of the country. All right. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes more? Okay. All right. A few words about the European system. It was primarily plantation, as I said before, in places like Principe, Sao Tome, Mozambique, Angola. It was full of slavery, okay? The Ashanti, the Ghanaians were able to avoid the use of slaves, in part because it was smallholder, in part because the technology was different. Not only that, many of the plantations died out. Those in Sao Tome, Principe died out. And even within Ghana itself, there used to be plantations there, similar ones. By 1940, all of them had closed shop, okay? They were unable to survive. All of this took place with very few implements, the cutlass, and this bowed thing to cut down the pods which were on the trees. Let me also mention another innovation that they had. All labor was hired, essentially a form of sharecropping. There are many who say that the word wages actually didn't exist in the Ashanti language, which I think is kind of interesting. As I think about the translation of the word wages that we use today, Ketua, payment of my debts. Okay, so you get a wage only if you have a debt, and you go and say, I'm going to work with you for about a month to pay off this debt. Okay? For the most part, the contracts were of two kinds. One is a kind where you're sharing the produce 50-50. So you get a laborer, and you say, you, this laborer, this is your plot of land. The two of us, I own the farm, you're coming to help me work on it. Anything that comes out of it, we'll divide it into two. Okay? One for you, one for me. That was a system that farmers used to spread their farms. So as they got more laborers, they got more patches of land. Okay? That was called the Abunu system. Means literally divided into two. Then there's the Abusa system, which is divided into three. Usually, when the farm is developed, you've got all the weeds down. It's later on in life. It becomes easier. Then you get it into thirds. The owner of the farm gets 2/3. The other person gets 1. Okay? So that was a system there. There were a few others. When it comes time to break in the pot, there'll be a communal system going on there. The farmer would cook a big meal, bring everybody else to help them harvest. I won't mention this one. I will mention something else that I just feel is going to get me into trouble. But let me mention it anyway in the interest of full disclosure here, okay? So, gender issues, okay? So it turns out, oftentimes, to expand farms, in those days, farmers would marry more, okay? More wives, more children. Again, we're talking 1879 to 1900s, okay? And so there was a boom in these kind of marriages. It has since stopped. But again, in the historical literature, that's part of what was happening. That being said, and I mention this just in case I get a question later on, the Ashantis are a matrilineal system. I was raised by women. My father died when I was 11. We had very, very strong women in our households. And many of those women owned themselves cocoa farms. So I was brought up from a household of women that actually owned cocoa farms. Okay, so I just want to put it out there in case there's question time later on. That's the miracle, okay? Within 20, 30 years, Ghana was producing 1/3 of all of the world's cocoa. Why do I keep mixing it up? We're doing work with the Ethiopian Commodities Exchange, and that one is coffee, so I keep mixing the two of them up, okay? All right, so I'll pause here. I'll just take a few more minutes, Bill. What has happened since then? And what are the lessons? So far we have the good lesson, right? The good lesson of entrepreneurs. You just give them the markets, they'll do the rest themselves. Let's look at the story post 1820, 1830. The colonial government is stronger. They start marketing boards. They start telling farmers how to produce. They go into the farms. If you don't produce this way, you'll get a fine. If you don't weed this way, you'll get a fine. By the way, you need fertilizers. We're going to provide those fertilizers. Okay? Slowly over time, the ingenuity of the people started diminishing. When the independence leaders came into power, they took from the British exactly the same thing. Cocoa was then put in the hands of something called the Cocoa Marketing Board, CMB. Politics got involved. Today it's called Cocoa Board. So now CMB, what they do is they collect the cocoa, they keep roughly 30% of it to themselves. They tell the farmers everything they need to know. They pretend to supply things like fertilizers, mechanized tools, tractors, silos for storage. And I know there's some Ghanaians in the audience. When you next go to Ghana, to a small place, even a moderate place, Takoradi, Kumasi, every now and then in the bush you'll see a very large concrete structure. It's usually the largest concrete structure out there, okay? Those used to be the storage silos. I encourage you all Ghanaians and anybody else who goes to visit Ghana, go check them out. When you go there, you'll see that it's closed. It's been closed since the independence days. You see grass growing through there, okay? I encourage you to go there. Always go with somebody who knows what they're doing. It has become a good place for finding the latest breeds of snakes. If you go there, you'll see these snakes whirled around. I went there a few times. It's just, it's all over the country. And so that was an experiment by Kwame Nkrumah in the 60s to build silos, not only for cocoa, but also for maize, okay? If you ask yourself, why are there no spin-offs from the success of cocoa? Why is it the case that despite the great entrepreneurial advancements of the cocoa producers end of 1800s, early 1900s, why have we seen nothing come out, okay? And if you go there and you talk to the people who are in the cocoa producing areas, you will sense a particular kind of apathy. Ask them any question. Why don't you guys get together and form a tractor? Oh, no, we can't do that. It's Cocoa Board's job. Why don't you guys get together and form a company to produce fertilizers? No, we can't do that. As soon as we try it, Cocoa Board, which has been infiltrated by the politicians, will immediately bring free fertilizers and kill that operation, okay? So again, all of these things that I'm trying to say, I'm trying to make two stories for you, if you will. First, the original one, the entrepreneurial activities of the farmers in the early period, and sort of the paternalism of governments today. It is killing initiative. It's killing growth. It's making things worse. Farmers do not need that much help, okay? they need markets, and they need governments to stay out of the way. Once you do that, they themselves, as we know from the Tetteh Quarshie story, will do the rest. Okay? All right, I think I'm going to stop here now. That's it. Let me end. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take questions now for Yaw. Please come up to the microphones on this side and this side with questions. And there's the usual instructions to keep your questions very brief, maximum 15 seconds, and make sure they are questions and not statements.
Hi, my name's Sebastian. I'm just a little confused on the contradictions that I'm seeing, because you guys are telling us that countries should open cross-national borders for trade, but you have these companies, and it's a similar situation to the one you were talking about in Ghana, like Monsanto that comes into India and sells BT seeds and GMOs to the farmers, and that in turn actually degrades the quality of life of the farmers and the general economy. So if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so I haven't been following the GMO debate that well. Yes, I am also worried that if all the seeds of the farmers come from a foreign, large multinational company, it's gonna affect things. It's not gonna be a good thing. I think I'm on your side on that. There are many people who are arguing. So there are two issues, right? One is the issue about just food security. If you need to get the seeds from one company and the company is somewhere else, what does it do to your food security? That's issue number one. Issue number two is the whole issue, the science behind genetically modified foods, okay? So that's a big debate that's raging on. There are pluses and minuses. It's more complicated. You know, you want to give incentives to companies to make genetically modified foods. Some of them are good, right? Okay? Over here, sir.
Yes. Given the fact that we have had so many African scholars that's been educated in some of these prestigious universities and so forth, at what point do we get it across to those spineless leaders on the African continent that Africa will only be developed when the Africans decide that they have had enough of the foot of the Europeans on their backs? Because I've been to many of these conferences, and the conversation always lead to the reasons why Africa is the way it is. And we know, you know, conscious people know why Africa is the way it is. But at what point do we stand up as a people and say, enough is enough, and we're going to turn the African continent around? You have given us some examples there, but you have had the NAFTAs and the CAFTAs and all these trade agreements that's been conjured up by the Europeans and the United States also, that come together and create these deals that bind and locks these small nations in a situation that they can't, because of lack of spine and because of lack of the power, the means of fighting off these powerful corporations that bribe these elected officials in the United States and in Europe and so forth. I don't know why they call them lobbyists. They are really crooks who bribes our elected officials. So if these small countries decide individuals to stand up to them, then they have the backing of the government, the United States and other European countries and these corporations to come down upon them with all these trade agreements and trade rules. So what to you is the way out? Because I am here today because I want to hear some solutions, and I want to see these young people here come up with some ideas rather than following the dictates of the corporation, because when they come out of here, many of them are going into the corporate world to create other means of finessing the enslavement of the rest of the world. So what to you, sir? I'm asking for some solution, because I'm an old man, and before I step through the pearly gates, I want to be able to tell Marcus Garvey and Kwame Nkrumah and all those folks, that the movement has started down here by African people to take back the continent from these rotten bastards that has taken it over. Thank you.
So thank you for the passionate statements there. Following, Ross's response, I agree with them all. What I will say, however, though, and this is, you asked me about students. I strongly encourage all of you, if you're passionate about Africa and African development, go to Africa. Don't stay here, okay? The reality out there is not what you read over here, okay? In the United States, the media can do funny things to your mind, okay? I'm from Ghana, but every time, like, I'm here 3-4 months, I go back to Ghana, it's a different reality out there. There's a vibrancy there, okay? Things are happening. People are changing things. People want things to happen, okay? When it comes to corruption, there are many people who are risking their own lives to fight against corruption, okay? They're doing what it takes. For us to sit here and just make aspersions about the people over there without the right information, without suffering the way they are suffering, is not right. So again, for all of you, particularly our students, go visit Africa. Go talk to people. Go figure out the real problems that are going on over there. That's the message I'll give all of our people. And if I'll put a little plug in for what we're doing at NYU, we now have, as I said, a building in Accra. We're putting up a town hall in one of the cocoa growing areas in the Ashanti region. I encourage you all to come visit and spend time in our research centers in the bush. Over there?
Yeah, hi. My name is Peter Burgess. I've done a little bit of work in coffee and cocoa in Africa over the years. And one of the questions has been, why is it that Ghana, for example, has not got a chocolate industry as opposed to just the bean producing industry? And a little bit of, this is a number of years ago, and the answer seemed to be duties, the structure of duties. Could you say something quickly about the structure of duties that are constraining the cocoa industry in Ghana?
So I'll give you a very quick response. Number one, I don't think it's our job or anybody else's job to pick winners. And that includes prescribing to Africa or Ghana that Ghana should be making cocoa, all right? Just leave the market alone and let the entrepreneurs decide what to do. I actually don't think production of chocolate in Ghana is a viable activity. I don't think the production of end product coffee in Ethiopia is a viable product, okay? I don't see how Ethiopian farmers can compete against Starbucks. You need the final companies to be here. I think that's a mistake. The main message is the message you're getting from the rest of these, particularly Bill's talk. Let the people decide. Just keep the markets open, reduce the duties and tariffs. People will decide on their own free will what they'll produce.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Alice Jones Nelson, and is this working? Okay. My research deals with encounters, post-colonial encounters between the institutions of nation and the institution of the family in Ghana. I heard you mention the cocoa boards, the marketing boards. I didn't hear a mention of the cocoa bank. And if there's something that you could share related to that, I would appreciate it. I would also like to hear, since we're talking about development, the economic cooperation of the families and cocoa farmers and the alternatives to the bank loans that farmers were using during the time that you've studied.
Yeah, so again, just to, sorry to be beating on a dead horse here, I don't think capital is a problem. Mm-hmm. I think it's just markets. People with great ideas are able to find capital. Individuals are able to figure out arrangements to do what they need to do. When you speak to farmers, most of the farmers have access to loans from the rural banks. The rural banks are actually the ones who are doing very, very well in Ghana, much better than all the others. And they'll just tell you, no, I don't want to go for a loan. The bank manager came to me and said, do you want a loan? And I declined, right? Because I can't find at this particular time profitable uses of the money. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Excellent presentation, Professor. Thank you. My organization will be building doing its first borehole project in the Volta region in Ghana next year. And you know, we've developed a relationship with some of the local villages. I agree with your assessment of letting the economic development evolve on its own. My question would be, as we're developing these relationships with these villages, what else would you recommend besides the water projects that we can bring there to share with these villages to make the process of satisfying basic needs less tedious?
Yeah, so again, early response. I presume you're spending a lot of time in Ghana, in the areas where you're doing the boreholes. I think it's great. As I said before, you wake up early in the morning there. Okay, 4:30 is when most people wake up, probably because of the heat in the afternoon. It's beautiful there at 4:30 in the morning. I mean, anyway, why am I up at 4:30 in the morning? But you'll see a lot of clatter, as I said before. There's a market in water, a big market in water. So perhaps some of the things you can do, start working with local entrepreneurs on boreholes, okay? Get a group of people together. Your job should be to send the technology over. Teach people how to do boreholing, okay? How do you figure out where to put the right borehole? Teach people. Let them form businesses. Before you know it, you'll have boreholes everywhere. In fact, can I come see you later on? I got a borehole I want to build, okay? All right, so that's my response. Yep.
Hi. I was just actually wondering how the effect of farmers' trade on the international market affects their profit margins and their ability to continue their work, and just how they work in general.
Yeah, so this is a complicated question for me. So I think these international agreements are good. To the extent that you can help the poor farmers, that's a good thing. However, Ghana is not going to grow and become rich by continuing the path of cocoa production. It's reached the max. Ethiopia is not going to develop by the better coffee agreements. It's a marginal, it's a tiny improvement on what's going on. It also involves distorting the international markets. You will not be able to sustain that. Okay, so those of you who are doing good work today, continue doing it. But remember, for long-term growth, Ghana's long-term growth does not lie in cocoa. It lied there in 1879, not today. Ghana should be looking for new things to develop, new technologies to exploit. Okay?
Hi, thank you for your talk. My question is, I know that in Latin America there's a big problem with disease killing off a lot of the cocoa, and they're trying to figure out ways to combat that. Is that also a problem in Ghana? And if so, like, what contingencies are they trying to arrange and create in order to kind of combat this threat to the cocoa industry?
So if there's one place where national institutions are important, it is in disease control. Universities. Ghana actually has CRIG, Cocoa Research Institute of Ghana. It's a fantastic facility. You walk in there, you think you're at Cornell University or something. And they're the ones who are doing work on swollen shoe disease, okay? So, yeah, Ghana has a very sophisticated disease surveillance system, control system, and that's what Cocoa Board should be doing, and nothing else. Cocoa Board is now, they build clinics, they build schools, they give scholarships, and that's all off of the 30% they're taking away from farmers, okay?
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is T. Rasul Murray. I have one question which may, given its tangential nature, best go offline. But when you spoke about the divisions in the Ashanti, having been in some recent discussions about the differences in the impact of the French versus the English colonization on indigenous cultures, I'm interested in how that might be manifest in the Ashanti. That it strikes me that the impact on Ashanti culture would have been different in the two situations given the different approaches of the colonizers. But more directly, apropos this discussion, I recently was reading a proposal for a model to do export cooperative training among craftspeople in Ghana. And I was wondering whether you could comment some on whether or not you think that an effective approach.
Yeah, so I think as regards borders, the only thing I'll just say is that the bad thing about borders is that it restricts trade. That's the main thing. The cultural things, they'll figure it out. And as I talk to people about, the rest of my family on the other side of the border, they're not that different from us. Okay? So that's all that I'll say there. Okay?
And as to the model for entrepreneurial craftspersons export
So
cooperatives?
again, I'm going to stick to what do you call it, the theme here. Train people. That's a good thing. Give them training, the technology. Then give them markets. Some of the things we're doing on cell phones, on the internet, to open up the market. Then leave them alone. Let them choose. They'll figure out everything else. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the presentation, Professor. So my question is, as far as opening the markets for the farmers, I know you know the Ethiopian experience with the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange. So can you comment on that, how important that for the farmers as far as opening market and benefiting those,
So I can tell you for sure that markets, in my opinion, are the most important things, okay? As I said before, Ethiopia's and coffee. Coffee is a great and important thing in Ethiopia. We should do as much as we can to help the farmers who are there today. Ethiopia is not going to grow because of coffee, okay? There's just not enough room for growth in coffee. The commodities exchange is a good thing, not because of how it's helping current coffee farmers, but because of the ability to use that exchange to produce other goods, okay? Other things that we don't even know of right now. Once you set up that market, later on somebody will come up with a different idea. Who knows? Chat, which is the, you guys know chat, right? It's the chewing thing, gives you a big high. I think it's the biggest export out of Ethiopia right now.
Yes.
Who knows what they're going to be able to do out of that once you have a market. It has some medicinal purposes. It could be used for something else. So that's my point.
Yes, thank you, Professor. I like your presentation. My name is Nana Akufulate. I'm from Mampong, so I was listening to your presentation. My issue is the extension of African traditional medicine. When you're making your presentation of the cocoa, when we were young, there's a soap that is called cocrodoma. It's made from the skin of the cocoa pod. They dry, they make it into powder, and they make soap with the palm oil. Very good for the skin. It clears all kinds of stuff on your skin. Now, what can we do so that the people ourselves, like we, the local people, the indigenous people, patronize our product? Because now, even if you go and give the cocrodoma soap to people, they wouldn't take it. They'd rather go and buy soap from Europe. That is not made in the local place. So what can we do so that we can, rekindle the interest in our product? Because there are so many stuff that are getting extinct. People are not interested. The old people are not teaching, or the young people are not living in the villages, so they don't know how the medicines are made so that they can sustain them.
So go visit Craig in Bonsu, which is close to Mampong. They're doing a lot of very, very good research on exactly those things. Somebody's going to figure it out. Just give them time, okay? There are a lot of new products coming onto the market. The only thing is that the Ghana government should allow people to actually take these ideas and run businesses with them. That's the problem. Once they develop something, then you have to go through a huge bureaucracy to actually put these things into the market. But be patient. It's on its way.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. It's been really informative. This question might be a little bit tangential and sort of more of a big idea question, I guess, but the theme of this conference so far seems to be saying that sort of cross-national borders should be open for trade purposes, and that and that governments should sort of stay out of the way, that they're not as important as we want them to be, and that there's also sort of this glorification of entrepreneurship and capital and business to a certain extent. But, I mean, regardless of that sort of argument, you end up having to deal with governments if you're going to engage in trade across borders, really any sort of international venture or national. So what then is the role? What then is the role of government? What should it be? I mean, it can't possibly be stay out of the way entirely, right? There are regulations that need to be set up to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, business takes advantage of labor all over the planet, so it's, you know, there is a place for it. So my question is, what should it be then?
So just to repeat, I think Bill made this very clear in his presentation. Nobody is saying that governments should not exist.
Right.
Nobody is saying that there isn't a positive role for government. All we're saying is that sometimes we think governments are more important than they really are.
Right.
Okay? So, what are some of my views? Anything that can be used to establish a new market. Ethiopia just has a commodities exchange. Ghana is thinking about it. That's a plus. Anything that has to do with disease prevention, that's a plus. Immunizations, that's a plus. National security, obviously, that's a plus. Where it's a minus, you see Ghana has something called the President's Special Initiative, right? The president of Ghana is given a pot of money to go out and start businesses, okay? If, you know, so rice farm. The president just says, I think rice farms are good. I'm going to sink $400 million in the middle of nowhere to make rice. And then 5 years later, it's gone. Cassava, something or the other. I'm going to spend $60 million on that. That is a bad use of the government.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentation. Can you speak a little bit about fair trade cocoa in Ghana? So specifically, how have efforts to regulate forced labor and child labor been effective in achieving those rights? Do you agree with those rights? Do you think they're misguided at all? Or are they just made to make the consumer feel better?
Yeah, so there are two parts of that question. Number one, as I said before, anything we can do to help farmers today, it's a good thing. So to the extent that fair trade farming improves the price of cocoa, obviously the farmers are going to benefit. Is that the long-run strategy for the economic development of Ghana? Definitely not, okay? So that's the first part. Second part, child labor. It's against the law. It's against the law in Ghana. It's against the law in Ethiopia. It's against the law anywhere. Anywhere and everywhere we see that, you have to prosecute the people, okay? So the Ghana government is doing that. Ethiopian government is doing that. Government in Cote d'Ivoire is doing that. And we in the international community should help governments, you know, have a stiff spine, I think the expression is. Yeah, it's against the law. The kids should be in school. All right, I think.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Ramoto Ahmed. I'm just trying to make a comment to the last speaker about child labor. Child labor is very bad, but at the same time, we can take care of our own destiny. Because when it comes to children, the way we raise our children is different. And we should have our own laws and regulations to take care of our children. We don't have some structures here that help the kids in Africa. So sometimes the children themselves, I mean, there are good and bad of it. I'm not for children trading and selling, but I'm a product of that. Sometimes you have to help your mother. I remember when my mother was trying to feed me at home. I have to help her to feed myself. I was a kid. But it was not my choice, but I fell for my mother. I have to help her before I could go to school. So we have to really weigh the stories before we make a conclusion. And we have to make sure that we have structures to take care of the children. If we want to help the children, then we have to help them pay their fees. There are a lot of children in Africa who cannot go to school because they cannot pay their fees. That is the most important we have to look into. Try to help the children, help the parents, put structures together that can give the children decent education. Not only going to school, but decent education that other children are getting in developed countries. Thank you.